5 a.m. Julie Ali standing in for Inayat Wadi, who is hopefully having a very, very well-deserved break. Right, next on the show, we'll be talking with Jan Vermullen. He is a senior journalist at a publication called My BroadBand. And we're going to be looking at the conspiracy theory about 5G towers causing COVID-19 to spread. Goodness me, what next? Okay, the ANC eThekwini councillor says that 5G towers spread COVID-19, and wait for this. He goes on to say that the white people in the country, in South Africa, have already had the vaccination or already have had the COVID-19 vaccine. Jan Vermeulen, morning, welcome to the program. And how do you respond to that?
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, I can address both questions because I'm both a technology journalist and a white person, and so I can say that I've not received the vaccine. I know that that sounds like something everybody would say, but I'd like to tackle the issue of the vaccine in a bit more depth. Let's start with this 5G thing first, though. So this is a conspiracy theory that's been floating around since last year, and while we laugh at how patently ridiculous it is, stuff like this can cause real damage. We've seen in the UK, for example, and not just the UK, but I believe in New Zealand as well, if memory serves, that people who find themselves swept up in these conspiracies can sometimes go out and do really terrible things. And so in the UK, some folks went out and set fire to cell phone masts.
Sure.
And so, we look at this and defense departments around the world look at this and go, effectively what's happened is social media, and whether that's the social internet or Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, has effectively been weaponized. It's become a theater of war because you don't have to try to infiltrate foreign terrorists into your country. If you're Russia or China, for example, and you want to attack the United States or the United Kingdom, then, if you can convince their own citizens to sabotage their infrastructure. And so what we're seeing is perhaps even the emergence of a new kind of warfare. And it's quite terrifying, to be honest, but also something that I think that we can defend against fairly easily, by just speaking up loudly and making sure the facts of stuff is known. So let's talk about some facts. So there are more nuanced versions of the 5G coronavirus conspiracy theory, that it's not the 5G causes the virus. I mean, there's all kinds of ridiculous stuff out there
Just
involving mind-controlling back.
Yeah, Jan,
Yes.
let me just stop you there. Let's backtrack to 10 or 20 years back, to more
Yes.
like 20 to 30 years back, when the cell phone companies were putting up the masts all over. At that time, the theory was, and whether it was a conspiracy theory or not, was that those cell phone masts was causing all of the cancers that we
Right.
found going around. So just respond to that before you carry on with the 5G towers.
Yes, that's such a good point, because the fact is we've seen versions of these conspiracies over the years, and we saw a resurgence of it when 4G became a thing. It's like, 4G causes cancer, now 5G causes cancer, and coronavirus also suppresses your immune system. And yes, there's the thing is, what happens is that people hear things like radiation, electromagnetic waves, and it's immediately associated with nuclear bombs, for example, that kind of radiation. And the two kinds of radiation are very different. The kind of radiation given off by a nuclear explosion or something similar is very different from the electromagnetic radiation used by cellular towers. And in fact, radio stations, normal radio stations that you tune into in your car, use that exact same electromagnetic radiation as cell phone towers do. So we've been surrounded by this kind of radio frequency electromagnetic radiation for but close to, it's like over a century now. I mean, I think this technology started before the 1900s, and so the argument that it causes cancer is it's difficult to disprove, because proving a negative is difficult, and isolating all the causes of cancer is supremely difficult. But the fact is, we've effectively been running a global human experiment in electromagnetic radiation exposure, there's no evidence to suggest that cancer is any more or less prevalent than before. People are getting older, so we're seeing more cancers, because as you get older, your chances of getting cancer becomes 100%. If you don't die of something else, you're going to die of cancer one day. To be cynical and blunt about it to people, but also there are very strict. To shift gears for a little bit, there are very strict requirements on or limits on the amount of radiation that radio towers can put out, that cell phone towers can put out. And by the way, if you've got DSTV at home, that also comes down with the same kind of electromagnetic radiation at a much higher frequency than cell phone towers use. But the strict limits that are put in place on this electromagnetic radiation is based on scientific testing that's done on what are considered safe limits for human exposure. So it's not that electromagnetic radiation is completely safe. Obviously not. But where it becomes dangerous is at extremely high power levels. And so that's what the safety limits are for, is to prevent unscrupulous operators from blasting out signals at power levels that might be dangerous. And so it's not about frequency, it's not about anything like that, it's about the power of the signal. And so perhaps, I don't want to scare people, but I want to put things in context. The amount of power put out by the cell phone against your head, or the Wi-Fi router in your house, is far higher, relatively speaking, than you will experience from a cell phone tower, because the cell phone tower is far away. So in physics, we have this principle called the inverse square law, which basically means is the further away you are from a source of radiation, of electromagnetic radiation, the power level that you're exposed to drops dramatically, like exponentially it drops. And so you are far more, if you want to be worried about electromagnetic radiation exposure, you should really be far more worried about the Wi-Fi router in your house or the cell phone next to your ear. In fact, a counterintuitive thing happens here, because the higher the power from the cell phone tower, the lower the power that your actual cell phone handset needs. And so there's this balance that emerges where you want the cell phone tower to put out a high enough power level so that your phone doesn't have to boost its antenna power to the point where it becomes dangerous, right?
Okay.
And so so I hope that makes sense to people. I can clarify more if people need.
So now the councillor, the ANC eThekwini councillor, is saying that 5G towers is spreading COVID-19.
Yes.
Let's understand why 5G towers were installed in the first place. Is it to boost capacity? Is it just to speed up networks? What's the role of the 5G towers? And how do you dispel that myth that he is suggesting, for example, that he is going to get his buddies and the entire community to take down these towers because he believes it's a threat?
Yes. So this is the danger I was talking about, that people then mobilize and start destroying infrastructure. But what ends up happening is people break down towers that aren't 5G towers. They see this tower in their community and then they burn it down. But then that wasn't even a 4G tower. That was maybe a 2G or a 3G tower. It wasn't close to a 5G tower, because you can't tell the difference between a 4G and a 5G tower. Now, the reason 5G towers were put up is because networks want to roll out the latest technology. So it started with Rain. A lot of people think it was Vodacom or MTN, but Rain was really the first network operator in South Africa to launch a commercial 5G service. And the reason is simple. They need to differentiate themselves to compete with Vodacom and MTN. Rain eventually wants to be able to stand on its own 2 feet. And to do that, it has to swim with the big boys, and that means rolling out the best technology it can on the resources it has. And so Rain is sitting in the very advantageous position that it can roll out 5G. Vodacom and MTN couldn't. Now, when ICASA released emergency spectrum as a result of the coronavirus crisis, so the national state of disaster was declared, and then ICASA released emergency spectrum for the networks to build out the capacity, because a lot of people were going to be staying at home, and so they needed the broadband, right?
Of course.
And so Vodacom and MTN used some of the spectrum, a little bit of the spectrum, to roll out 5G to prove a point, to say, look at what we can do if we have the spectrum. But that 5G doesn't really benefit anyone immediately. My phone doesn't use 5G. Your phone doesn't use 5G. We can't actually connect to those 5G networks unless you go out and buy a special 5G router, right, at this stage. And so the rest of the emergency spectrum these networks were given, they used to build out their 4G and 3G networks. But they used a little bit of it to prove a point, is what it's about, to prove a point to government, to the South African people, to say, if we had the spectrum, we could roll out 5G tomorrow.
Okay.
And so that's why 5G started rolling out. Durban, by the way, was one of the last big cities in the country to receive 5G. And if you like, the simplest argument I can make against the councillors' conspiracy theory here is that if 5G causes coronavirus, or if you want to have a more nuanced argument, reduces people's immune systems to cause coronavirus, the fact is, KZN was one of the provinces that had the worst number of cases of the virus in the country. It was between it and the Eastern Cape that were neck and neck at one stage for being the worst off. And
perhaps that's why he's using that as the
but that was
argument.
before 5G. That was before 5G was
5G.
on.
Okay, now
the 5G hadn't.
right.
Yeah, that's the argument I was making. The 5G hadn't even been switched on in Durban yet, and they were so bad off. So honestly, coronavirus is caused. Is like any other coronavirus, rhinovirus, or influenza virus. It spreads through contact, through people coughing on one another.
It's like the flu virus. Okay,
now similar in terms of how it spreads.
Okay, now this councillor, his name is Sifiso Mngadi, goes on to say, you've explained that very succinctly in terms of 4G and 5G and electromagnetic waves, etc. Thank you indeed for that. Let's just go to the issue around the white people. He says that white people were vaccinated about 5 months ago. There was a truck that distributed the vaccines in boxes, and white people from all over the province, including places like Ikopo and Vryheid, went there to receive these boxes. It was given to white people only. And he said that once 5G towers are disconnected, there would be no more sickness in eThekwini. And this thing of sitting around waiting for Zweli Mkhize and for Ramaphosa, he says, let us just disconnect the 5G towers ourselves because other countries have done so as well. And he also goes on to claim that he's done extensive research in this and he stands by what he has said. Do you believe that action should be taken against a man like this?
Yes. As a government official, he has a tremendous responsibility to ensure that he doesn't spread misinformation and disinformation that is designed to rile up citizens of a country to become saboteurs against their own infrastructure. Yes, the strongest possible action to be taken against him. I ran from reading the comments of a DA councillor that the councillor here is described as eccentric, but that is just not an excuse. As a public official, you have a high responsibility and a high amount of accountability to ensure that you do not feed misinformation into a system and cause and effectively incite violence and sabotage against your country. And so to address some of the claims, some of the further claims there, firstly, I don't know of any country that switched off their 5G towers. And so China, who has the virus under control, as far as I can tell, according to the public figures that they've released, by the way, whether you want to believe them or not, an entirely different story. But I've got friends in China. I've been seeing their updates on Instagram and stuff. They're carrying on almost like the virus isn't there, almost, right? But that's because the East is incredibly well prepared, thanks to SARS and MERS and other outbreaks, for how to deal with pandemics. And so they've been going to New Year's parties. You know, that they've been having a grand old time, and they haven't switched off 5G.
Okay.
Right? And so they haven't switched off 5G. That's the one thing. And they don't have a vaccine either, right? So,
they're only busy. They're rolling out now. They're rolling out as we
exactly.
speak.
Exactly. And so on the topic of vaccines being rolled out 5 months ago, that's just basically a lie, because there was none.
We're running out of time, Jan. I'd love to host you on another show sometime soon, and so we can go into much more detail. But on a lighter note, I'm just going to end with this thought. You can respond if you like. I'm just curious to know. I'd love to know what were in those boxes that took 4 hours for the white people to offload outside that garage. I'm dying to know what was in those boxes. Do you have any idea?
I have no idea what that might have been. If it was a kind of food parcel delivery or what, I'd also love to know, but I know it was no vaccine.
All right. What I do also think that if he is so hell-bent on suggesting that the 5G towers are causing COVID-19 and those were vaccines, why did he not get out of the car, confront the people and ask them what's in the boxes?
I expect fear would be his answer, that he was afraid. I mean, he was totally outnumbered from the sounds, from what he described. And that's even if the thing that he describes happened, if he's not just lying about that too. Right.
Okay.
So it's difficult to take him seriously.
Right. Sorry, we have to leave it there. I've run way out of time. We will talk again sometime soon. Thank you indeed for your input, and lovely talking to you.
And you too. Have a great day further.
Bye-bye.
An act of love saves lives. Sponsor an orphan with Islamic Relief.